All right. So anyway, we're talking about just study guide materials, things like that. If you are interested in doing your A+ certification, which is probably not a bad idea, maybe at the end of the quarter or next quarter, give yourself some time to self-study for it. One thing to note is that the college, I signed up to be a CompTIA partner, which it was just some paperwork to fill out. So if you use your college email address when you sign up, you can get a discount. At least you could last year. I think you can this year too. So the certification exams, there's 2 of them. So each book that we've got this quarter coincides to one of the certification exams. You have to take both exams within 6 months of each other. I need to double check that. That's what it used to be as well. So if you're interested in that, long story short, things like Quizlet or going online and looking for, sometimes we'll do this in class, even we'll look for free A+ study guides, and there'll be some, test questions online or some sample, quiz, like websites you can walk through, and it'll give you a bunch of practice test questions, stuff like that. And that's kind of what the idea with the quizzes are, is that your quiz questions are supposed to help prepare you for taking the actual A+ exam. So last time. Okay, so anyway, you've got three chapters in the first one, kind of just laying it out there. We're going to be talking about some of the stuff in chapters 2 and 3 as well. One of the things that was brought up yesterday was somebody had asked about upgrading or building a system that would support virtual reality, specifically their Oculus headset. So things like that are good questions, and also lead themselves to, like, one of our assignments for class is to pick, a purpose that you're going to build a computer for. And typically, if you're building a decent system, the nice thing about a PC is that it is very cross compatible with a lot of other things that it could do, right? So if you build a decent gaming computer, it's probably going to work for other stuff too. Now, the exception might be, some really high end, like 3D modeling and stuff like that. They've got some very specific video cards for that. But even then, a decent gaming video card can cross over and work for that too. I had some students doing the 3D, the digital design class, and they just bought a halfway decent gaming video card, and it worked pretty well for doing things like Rhino or 3D Studio Max and some of those other programs that are out there. So so anyway, building we'll kind of spec out a system, but if we have a specific question about hey, what kind of computer would you need to run the HTC Vive or the 2nd gen Oculus and stuff like that, those would be good questions to bring up, and then maybe use that as a guideline for building our pretend system that we'll go through. But some of you guys have already built your own computers, and that's awesome. It's not really that hard to assemble them, but troubleshooting and things like that is definitely up there. And then we'll also look at upgrade paths for computers as well. All right, and I did get an email from one of the students that had picked up one of the older computers, and they were having some problems resetting the BIOS password. So that's another good a good side topic that we'll delve into, is taking one of those apart, or if they're, I don't know if they're in, anyway, if you have questions like that, those are great questions to post on Discord, so under the class discussions area, and that way we can open it up to more discussion from other people, so that it becomes more of a learning experience rather than just me potentially answering the question. So, all right, let me get all right, and again, chapter 2 kind of talks about, so I'm in chapter 2 of the hardware book, kind of looking at kind of the main broad topics. If anybody else wants to pick up one of these computers or wasn't able to get down here last week when we were doing that, I do have more of these available if somebody wants one. And you don't have to necessarily take it apart if you want to put something on it. Now, a few people had booted them up and they still had a copy of Windows on there, but obviously they don't have the administrative password. That wasn't the intention, to use Windows that's still on the computer. We were going to be installing, there actually are some installation USBs you can make to reinstall Windows 10 for free still these days. Or you can make an installation USB that has Linux on it, and we'll look at that as an option for you guys as well to play around with it. And at the beginning of class, I asked you guys to round up flash drives. Does everybody have like a 8 gig flash drive at least? Okay, if you don't, get one sooner rather than later. A lot of times those smaller ones are kind of kicking around. Either you probably have one in your desk or a kitchen drawer or something like that. It doesn't need to be a huge flash drive. So for our purposes, what we're going to be playing around with them for, they don't need to be particularly large capacity. So that's actually nice too. So if you're buying one, get a couple of cheap ones, that kind of thing. But yeah, if anybody else wants one of those old computers, let me know. We can arrange a pickup time and you can come down and pick one up. And I was able to find mice and keyboards for them, and then maybe even an old monitor, although the monitors are pretty crappy. So if you have anything else to plug it into, that would probably be better. Okay, so chapter 3, we're looking at motherboards. And again, this becomes a good basis for building your system, but there's questions you have to ask yourself before you get to that point. So just as a show of hands, how many of you prefer AMD CPUs? And then how many of you prefer Intel CPUs? How many don't care, or if it works, then if you plug it in and it works, then it's great. All right. So yeah, there's definitely 2 camps there. You've got the AMD versus Intel. Kind of like Ford versus Chevy almost. They do work. They both work, obviously. And then sometimes a new processor will come out and you really get, it really sets the bar a little higher. Or a lot of times what they're shooting for is to have a lot better performance for a cheaper price. So there's a price game there as well. Now it is kind of funny that we're down to just 2 main companies that make processors for personal computers. There used to be a couple others, Motorola. Now those other companies still make chipsets and CPUs and things like that. But in terms of our processors for our main, computers that people use, personal computers, those are the only 2 games in town right now. And at least there's 2 of them though. So like if Intel was the only one, their prices might start creeping up, but they have competition in the market, which is good. And AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, they've been around for a long time. They actually started out in business making authorized clones of Intel processors. So I'm talking way back, like with, before Windows 95. So probably like, early 90s or something, they were making clones of Intel processors that were licensed. And their claim to fame was that they would make them just a little bit faster. So if AMD was making a DX266, they'd make a DX280 or something, something that was just a little bit faster. So that's always kind of been their game, is to make either something that's a little bit different or cheaper. But they're definitely both good quality CPUs and are worth looking at. And typically in a certain price point, you're going to have fairly competitive speeds. So we'll look at the different speeds of processors when we get there. It's interesting that the book puts motherboards first, but that kind of makes sense. They're talking about what's inside the case, and then you're breaking it down. Well, the motherboard, or also known as the system board, is pretty much, what holds everything together, literally, and then also logically in terms of the data structure. So we looked at pathways within the motherboard, and the circuitry that's involved with these multi-layer circuit boards within the motherboard. And then also the fact that the motherboard is providing power. So you're plugging in your power supply to the motherboard, and then it provides power to the rest of the devices. So here you've got I meant to bring in my little computer too that is not working. It'd be a good troubleshooting one. So I built this little computer. It's a mini ITX board, I believe. Looks kind of similar to what I've got on the screen here, which I'll share. So it quit working. It might be the power supply. It's nice to have extra components to swap in, if you're trying to test stuff. But I'll show you how to test power supplies as well. So we'll bust out the multimeters. How many of you have or know what a multimeter is? Voltmeter, ohmmeter? Okay, so basically a little box, it's got a knob on it and a couple of wires that come out with some pointy connectors on them. And it's got a red and a black one. So positive for red, black is negative. And you can test voltage, alternating current, you know, if you're at the wall. Computers run on direct current. So you switch the little thing to DC, and then we'll be testing power supplies to see, okay, is it putting out power? You know, yes, no, maybe, that sort of thing. But to start with, we'll talk a little bit more about motherboards. But the first question, that's why I brought up the CPUs thing, was, you know, if you are building a computer, before you even get to the part of motherboards, you're going to need to be, you can see, oh yeah, this is why my computer uses so much RAM. Can you guys see the toolbar at the top? Yeah. So how much RAM am I using right now? Let's see here. I have way too many things open. Okay, so yeah, I'm not doing too bad today, but yeah, that's 11.6 gigs of memory, 15 gigs. Yeah, I'm using quite a bit of RAM for not really running anything. So I've got Zoom open, a couple applications, and then a whole bunch of system tabs under the processes, so under my apps. Yeah, it's definitely Google, and Google Chrome is a memory hog, but yeah, it's definitely using up most of the RAM is the Google Chrome with all the tabs open. All right, anywho, so there's a motherboard. This is a smaller, this is the micro ATX form factor. So it's basically a square. It's not the smallest form factor, but it's pretty close. Also notice as I zoom in, these round holes, those are the stand where you'd mount the standoffs for the motherboard. So if you're changing out motherboards, just as a quick heads up, if you're changing out motherboards or maybe changing form factors, you know, a larger size case will mount one of these smaller motherboards. But you know, typically if you're buying a small motherboard, you're doing it because you want a smaller computer. But underneath each of these, you would have a brass or plastic standoff that screws into the case. And before you, now if you're taking out a motherboard and replacing it with an identical one, not really a concern. You know, you're assuming that the standoffs are all going to be in the right location. But one thing to keep in mind, you know, each one of these is where you would have a screw that is going to thread through the motherboard and secure it to a standoff in the case. And the standoffs are, just like the name implies, just a metal threaded screw, looks like kind of like a long nut, and it will keep the motherboard away from the metal case, right? Because the back of the motherboard, if you're looking at the backs of the motherboards, have, you know, little solder joints and stuff like that. So you don't want to be touching the motherboard to metal. It's going to ground itself out and cause bad things to happen. But you also want to make sure that the standoffs are all in the correct location, that you don't have one kind of in the middle of the motherboard where it's not supposed to be. So you kind of do a visual inspection, make sure you've got the standoffs screwed into the case in the right spot, you know, if you're building a brand new computer. And then you securely attach the motherboard. Also, it's nice whenever I'm working on something and it comes with extra screws, I put the screws in a little, you know, can or something and save them. There's basically coarse thread screws and fine thread screws of, you know, basically two different sizes. But hang on to extra screws and things like, you know, if you're mounting hard drives into the case, stuff like that. It's just nice to kind of have a little pile of extra parts if you're, you know, you start collecting them over time. Or if you're taking apart an old computer and junking it, you can, you know, scrap it and keep all the screws and mounting plates and stuff like that. Okay, so the first thing you'd want to be asking yourself then is, you know, what is the CPU that you want to use, and is it an AMD or an Intel? And as the book goes into motherboards and starts talking about the socket types, right? So each socket type is going to align with a different generation of CPU. So there's going to be, as new CPUs come out, most of the time that indicates that they're going to need a new socket type, a new chipset, obviously a new motherboard. So if you're trying to, you know, build a system, that's going to be the first question that you're going to ask yourself is, in fact, you know, what, as I'm scrolling through here, here's a mini ITX in the board too. So here it gets to processor sockets, right? So the socket type is pretty important, but it's dictated by the actual processor. So if you've got a list here, and this is the kind of thing where I'm like, you guys can just look this up. I mean, there isn't really, you've got the book for it. You can Google stuff. You know, if you have a certain processor that you're purchasing, Then you've got PC Parts Picker, as a couple of you have mentioned. You can look it up online and determine, okay, what is the socket type that I'm going to need. And then also, if there's several chipsets to make a choice of, you can make an informed decision about which chipset is going to perform for you the best, in terms of, what is it that you're actually doing with the computer? Is it going to be a high-end gaming machine, kind of more middle of the road, or are the features that the high-end chipset offers, are they even important to you? Okay, so here it's got the socket types. So LGA 1150, 1155, 2011. So as you kind of go down the road here, the processor that's in these is an i7 7700K. So I could look that up if I wanted to take, so let's say I wanted to take the computer that I've got right now in the classroom, and I wanted to build another system around the processor. I would be looking at trying to find, a motherboard that matches up to this CPU. Maybe I would want to do that because, this is a Dell computer. It doesn't let me overclock, right? But my processor is a 7700K. So if I look that up real quickly here, let's see what kind of socket type it takes. So Intel.
Was it like 1151 or something?
Yeah, so you just Google it, boom, here. So if I was looking this stuff up, so the 7700K takes an 1151 socket, so that's going to narrow down our choices of motherboards, right, appreciably. The processor at this point is a few years old, but it's still relatively new enough that I should have a good selection of motherboards to look at. So yeah, it's still more than I thought it was. So this one would be a pretty good candidate if I was going to take, a Dell computer and make some upgrades to it. The motherboard itself that's in these Dell computers is a limiting factor. I mean, it works okay, but it's somewhat proprietary in the sense that, the way the cooling system is and everything, it's not a true ATX motherboard. And then also the fact that if I get into the BIOS on it, or UEFI, whichever one you want to call it, it doesn't allow me a lot of flexibility for overclocking and stuff like that. So if that was something I would want to do, I would be looking at buying a new motherboard. Oh, this is just a link for the processor, but all right. So we looked at the ARC the other day because I was looking up. So the ARC is handy if you're looking up specs on the individual processors. So if I was looking at LGA 1151 socket motherboards. Look at Newegg here. All right, so then I can narrow it down and start looking at motherboards. And so you can see socket LGA 1151 still offers, over 1,000 choices. So it's still a relevant newer motherboard that's decent. If I started looking for an older processor, it would be much more difficult. So like I have that older 2600K series, which is, yeah, it's an old processor at this point, but it's still decent. But trying to find a motherboard for that is going to be a little more difficult, much more difficult. Oops, lost my stuff there. All right. Okay, so socket type dependent on CPU, figure out what kind of CPU you want, narrows it down pretty quickly if you want AMD versus Intel. Maybe you still want to do some research on those and look at, if there's new CPUs that are coming out. A lot of times, if there's something brand new coming out, that's going to force the pricing down on the previous generation of CPUs. That might be a good time to buy that most recent generation of CPU that's not the newest. So you're kind of stepping down a little bit. You're not on that bleeding edge of technology kind of thing. So here we go. Here's a good picture of the socket 1155 stuff here. So if you guys are replacing CPUs too, this is something where, if you're taking a computer apart completely, one thing that's nice to have is some replacement thermal compound. It comes in a little tube. They have the Arctic Silver brand and these other things. So if you are taking apart a computer or building one, or maybe wanting to refurbish one, once you take it down to this level, now this is showing a nice clean CPU. Normally after you take off that heat sink, there's going to be this gray, a lot of times it's dried to be kind of like a putty-like consistency. It's, and you're going to want to clean that stuff off. They have, special cleaner that you can buy. But otherwise, a little rubbing alcohol and you can rub that, clean it off, and then put new thermal compound on there. But this type of processor socket is pretty interesting. So you release that metal handle, and then the looks like kind of like a picture frame flips open, and then it holds the CPU in the socket that way. Now these CPUs don't have pins. They've got like a little, a hemisphere, really like a half of a ball that fits down into a little socket that way. So it's not a true, so yeah, they call it a blunt protruding pin or a land and pad. So it's nice that way. This plastic cover you take off of there as soon as you're mounting the CPU in there. And if you've got a CPU, keep it in the socket of the motherboard. You don't need to be, don't leave it laying around somewhere. It should be in its little holding, that's a good place to keep it, is in the motherboard, right? So there's the LGA 775. It says is the first one to use lands rather than pins. Functionally, they both work the same. I think the Intel idea is pretty nice in the fact that they don't have little pins that can get bent. But like I said, if you are keeping the CPU where it's supposed to be, you shouldn't be worrying about bending the pins on it anyway.
Yeah, that plastic covering, I do want to say one thing. I learned from my mistake of replacing CPU and then doing the evac, and my depth perception was off, and I totally destroyed my motherboard socket because of the pins, and I bent it. So if you're ever taking CPU off and you're cleaning it, put the plastic covering on and save yourself a couple $100 and not don't do what I did.
So you had the plastic cover on, or you didn't have the cover on, and then
I had the cover on, and then the nozzle of my evac.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, bummer. Yeah. So if you zoom in, you can see these are, so not so much the CPU side, but the socket. So that's what you're talking about, got bent down inside the socket.
Magnifying glass and mechanical pencil with no lead in it because of the tube, and I try to bend it back, and it's
really, really hard to fix. Yeah. So yeah, those are pretty delicate so yeah, at any rate, keep the CPU in its socket, or I usually throw those little plastic covers away after I'm done building the computer, but it might be good, I guess, to have one keeping around, especially if you were going to maybe, recycle the motherboard and ship it or something. So, all right. So at any rate, they're just talking about these cautions here. So this is a good time to be aware of the ESD, the electrostatic discharge. Just, be smart about it. I don't typically use a static wrist guard strap, but it's something to be aware of in terms of the, just the potential for generating static electricity. But yeah, usually I'm working on, the kitchen table, wood floor, not going to be generating a lot of static electricity, so it's relatively safe. But if you're working on something a lot or doing this as a business, or maybe working on somebody else's very expensive computer, spend the $5 on a little wrist strap, and it's got a little clip that you can clip to the metal part of the case to ground yourself out. Okay, so in terms of chips, so in terms of like what we'll try to be looking at is, I guess we'll have to decide, or you guys can decide, if we're building a pretend computer and thinking about what flavor you want to build, AMD versus Intel, you kind of just make a choice. Some of our choices are dictated by cost. So if we're let's pretend like we were going to be looking at I didn't look up the Oculus Rift or Oculus headset. So who was it that had the VR, the Oculus headset that was in class?
That was me.
Yeah. So is it the Quest 2?
Yes.
Okay, so just as an example, so I'll share a screen again here. So this just is kind of giving us a guideline. So if you were building a computer for a certain purpose in mind, now if you were just building a general gaming computer, what do you think the most expensive components are that are going to be really breaking the bank for building a computer these days?
Graphics card.
Graphics, yeah.
Yeah, the graphics card, definitely. And it's gotten really crazy for a number of reasons. Some of it has to do with people using them for mining cryptocurrency. Some of it is the chip shortage that, is happening, whether it's affecting cars being produced or RAM or graphics cards or whatever. but the graphics cards are really going to be driving a lot of the cost of the computer. So here just quickly is, I just looked this up just real quick. So the Oculus Quest 2, these are the minimum system requirements. So you're looking at a GeForce GTX 970 or an AMD Radeon 400 series. And we would probably look at, they've usually got low, medium, and high like system requirements. So let's see if we've got the better. Okay, so I was looking for recommended. There we go. Yeah, it's okay, that's what we want. We'll stick with that for a second. So at any rate, you're looking at, you know, an Intel i5, an older, you know, 4000 series, or, so these aren't real high system requirements, but these are basic ones. Let's look at video card requirements, recommended. I'm just using this as an example for something, if you have a specific piece of hardware that you're trying to run, right? Or a specific game. Is anybody playing a game lately that requires pretty high system requirements?
Pretty well optimized, but you know, there's like actually one example is New World and the new 3000 series, and a lot of individuals and players getting their graphics card burnt up because of like uncapped frame rates and other fail-safe in the hardware. New World is that new Amazon game that came out.
Oh, okay. All right, so yeah, we're looking at chat for just a second. So yeah, graphics and CPU, two big components. I'll have to check out the New World game as well. I haven't been gaming too much recently, so I might, you know, if there's something that comes out that's really interesting, might take a look. So
Hey, actually, I read they're remastering Crysis 1 and 2 or whatever, so they're updating the engine on that.
And that used to have a reputation for really having high system requirements. Like if there was a game that was going to push your system, the Crysis games were ones that were really going to push your system. So sometimes for class, we would use those as an example. So you'd pick a game that you might want to play, or pick a game that's coming out that has pretty high system requirements. And then you look at those system requirements, and then you start speccing a system that's going to meet or exceed those. So you're hoping to give your computer a little bit of extra lifespan, right? You don't want to build something that's, you know, already outdated. But you also don't want to just go hog wild and, you know, spend a bunch of money maybe on something that you don't need. And most of us are under a, so yeah, RGB lighting, gaming chair, which doesn't really fall into the computer category, but it's kind of related. So keyboard, none. Okay, so we're kind of went off the rails here in the chat at some point. So all right, so at any rate, we'll kind of keep that in mind in terms of you know, potentially building a computer, having some goal in mind, and then also money becomes a factor. Like I said, you know, my computers, I've got quite a few old computers around the house. Some of them I picked up at auctions. I've built a few of them, and since I'm not gaming that much or hardly at all anymore, I don't have anything that really needs a super fast computer at the moment. I did spend some money and built a network attached storage device at home. So that the requirement was that it, you know, had to, you know, a really basic computer, but I was just putting in 5 hard drives into it. And so basically kind of making like a home server type of deal. Oh, okay, so Brandon's saying the beans came from a video on YouTube where a guy filled up an old PC with beans.
Right, that's right.
Okay.
It's a gag channel, and he goes to like people's homes too that aren't for sale, and he'll put a for sale sign on it, and then he'll just record the interaction. It's hilarious. We
might have to catch one of those there and see. Yeah, I used to work at this place a long time ago, and we have people bringing in computers to get fixed and stuff. And some of them would have, one person brought one in that had a mouse nest in it. And it was like, I don't know how the mice got in there, because they didn't have like, they can fit through some pretty small spots, but okay. So anyway, now you got me curious about the beans thing. We're running, so we'll
probably laugh. It's a good one.
Like back to the beans.
Tech guy to come in and fix his computer, and it's
We actually have a couple minutes here real quick, so we'll see if I can find the. Oh. How long is this? We might have to fast forward. Okay, we got a few minutes. All right, we're gonna watch the beans thing here real quick. I think I found the right one since we are. Okay, so someone flip. Is this the right one?
So no one's ever pranked Ross, but today that's exactly what we're gonna do. Mike bought this van.
For what? 300, 400 bucks? Yeah, 450.
I think it'll fire up. 300.
Is this the right one? You guys have the filling my PC with beans. It's
No, I don't.
no,
Go to wait.
There's
There's
a timestamp in it.
Fast forward like halfway through the
Filling up
video.
this computer with beans.
So,
What is going on? Oh, man, I'm gonna tell him that you're working on it and telling me the power supply.
oh, it's short.
Oh my gosh. Dude,
Yeah, he say it's a power.
wait. Come here for a minute.
He said it's power.
Dude,
Huh.
have you ever opened this computer up before?
And no.
I'm going to open it up and show you something I've never seen before in my life.
What?
What? What is all this in here? This is not supposed to be inside a computer. This is beans inside.
It's not like to help the computer stay cool or anything.
No. Someone sold you something with a bunch of beans in it.
What's under these?
That's the motherboard, and actually...
These are the motherboards?
No. You all of this stuff you're seeing, this pile of...
These are the motherboards.
No, this is food. This is beans. Someone put beans inside the computer.
Yeah, okay. So, all right. There's probably, that one was pretty short. There's probably more to it. So now I'm, but yeah, I can't believe anybody would fall for that. So beans inside the motherboard. Oops. Okay, so in terms of pricing, because this will, all these are motherboards. Yeah, those are. So what is this here? Yeah, the pranking videos are pretty funny, but I'm surprised in some of those prank videos that people don't get hurt too. Like not the beans ones, but some of the weird ones. But
well, historically, AMD has kind of had a larger share in like server like processors, right? And then they kind of went with like the Threadripper, I think, into the more kind of giving Intel a run for their money. You know.
well, Intel has pretty much dominated the high-end server stuff with their Xeon processors. You don't usually see those in home computers for the Xeons. But yeah, in terms of the gaming market, it seems like AMD has kind of been really pushing in terms of gaming PCs and that market, right? So plus AMD bought a company called ATI a few years ago. Were you guys familiar with ATI video cards? Now AMD bought that whole company, and so now they're just AMD video cards. But what that gave them was a pretty good infrastructure for video card or graphics development, right? So AMD and ATI merged, and then AMD got a reputation for having pretty good onboard graphics. Do any of you have a computer that doesn't have, other than a laptop, do any of you have a desktop computer that doesn't have a dedicated graphics card? Like one of the ones I'm running at home, it doesn't have a graphics card. It just runs the graphics off the CPU, right? So you have an integrated graphics.
The one that I'm repairing, it does the HP that I have. It has an integrated graphics card on it.
Yeah, and Intel has their own integrated graphics as well, but AMD got a reputation for having pretty decent integrated graphics. So some of these, and they actually call it instead of a CPU, they call it an advanced processing unit, which is still a CPU, but it includes a graphics subsystem that's pretty darn fast and pretty decent. So if you weren't a hardcore gamer, you can buy it and build a computer and not even worry about putting a graphics card in it. You can run it on integrated graphics. But like I said, if you were gaming on any, and wanting to do better gaming, that would be a good upgrade path, is to build the computer and then think about buying or putting in a regular video card down the road.
Yeah, that's been the bummer about laptops, and it's kind of changing a little bit to where it's like a full size replaceable GPU. So then they're not cornering the consumer into the position to like replace the complete laptop instead of doing like upgrades.
Yeah, laptops, by and large, what you buy is what you are going to, there isn't a huge upgrade path for laptops with there. It's talked about in the book. So you've got the options to add a little more RAM to it, possibly upgrade. If it had a standard hard drive, you could upgrade it to a solid state drive. Those are both decent upgrade paths, but it's a little tougher to think about having a laptop be expandable or upgradable because, you know, you're limited to it being, you know, in a physical case that doesn't have a lot of room in there. So. Okay, so we'll look at your own computers and kind of give you guys can kind of do a system analysis of your own computers that you've got at home. You can use some of the tools that are on the book or in the book, excuse me. So in this section is talking about identifying chipsets and processors of your own computer. Pretty standard. I showed you guys the MS config the other day. So system configuration or system information tool. So if you just type system information into your search bar, you should come up with a basic tool there. We also looked at Speccy yesterday, SPECCY. You can use that. Your book has you looking at these processor ID or processor identification tools. Those work too. And then a chipset, but you've got options besides that. So besides the tools in the book, you've got some tools that are built right into Windows. You've got Speccy. There's other in there. I think of the other ones that you can download as well. So the ARC database we looked at yesterday, I kind of looked up the processor that I had in this computer. You guys can do the same thing for your own computers at home, kind of see what you've got for your own processors. And I'll post some of these links on the into Canvas, I guess, CPU. So here's something I think, if you guys are gamers, here's something I think is one of the big limitations of Windows or something that it could do better. And one of that is system monitoring. I mean, yeah, you've got some, you know, tools that you can download, but Windows should have these things in it, and it doesn't. So here's, this is a good quick article. I've used SpeedFan before. How many of you have used SpeedFan?
I am not.
All right, so SpeedFan's pretty good. So this is temperature monitoring tools for Windows. A lot of these also include tools to monitor the fan speed, and you can set a threshold. So for instance, if your CPU fan or case fan drops below a certain RPM, you're going to get a notification. And the idea there is like, if it just physically stopped working, the bearings are going out, whatever, not a bad idea to take a look at that. But your motherboard and processor include temperature monitoring sensors. And why Windows doesn't include this and just put it down in the toolbar, right? Down in the toolbar, you could have a little thing with the temperature going. Would be a nice option. So these are things you guys can download and put on your own computer or start testing them out. So Core Temp is number one. Says as long as you don't need an extensive hardware monitoring program, you just want a lightweight, straightforward temperature monitor. You can download these. Hardware Monitor. SpeedFan is the one I've used in the past. Now this does let you manually control fan speed as well. I would recommend just not messing with that. And if you use this one, you don't want to turn off your fans accidentally. A lot of systems won't let you do that, but yeah, it does allow you to make the fan ramp up and cool or slow down at a different rate than what it would normally do. I haven't used Open Hardware Monitor. But these would all be good. Something they thought they'd show little screenshots, but most of them, and here's Speccy as well. So Speccy is the one we looked at yesterday, and it does show you the temperature information. But what I like is one that you can actually launch and then have it go onto your toolbar, just so you got like something you can keep an eye on. Hardware Info is a good one as well. So there's lots of them out there, but if you don't have something like that already, this would be a good thing. So I'll get SpeedFan just for fun, see if this Okay, so and it's a real it's been around forever. Here I get to try to figure out where it is on the download page. I'll come back to this. This is like an antique looking website. Here's its screenshot. All right, well, I'll come back to that once I figure out where it is to download. Make this bigger. And 452. All right, so it's just a straight up executable. It doesn't even install. So yeah. You guys on this screen. All right. Okay, so there is SpeedFan running. I will try to show you guys what it looks like here. And it's still thinking about it. It may not actually, it may not be compatible with Windows 11 very well. It's still thinking about it. There it goes. All right. It is at least showing me the temperatures of the processor.
I've used the HW monitor in the past. I like that one.
The hardware monitor might be a better choice. So, so one of our little side things is you guys can check those out and try them. And if you don't like them, just delete them, you know, uninstall them. The SpeedFan one is not, it's giving me basic temperatures. I may have to go in and configure it a little bit, so I'll share it. But it's obviously pretty old school. And it may or may not be real compatible with Windows 11 as possible. So it's showing me that the clock speed at 7,700, and then it's showing me the temperature, and it's a 4-core CPU. So you've got core 0, 1, 2, and 3, and it's showing me the temperature of each one of those cores. Now it is running cooler than it was the other day. It was 40 degrees centigrade Celsius yesterday. And then there's a configuration option here, but yeah, it's not showing me much of anything for these readings here. Hard disk. Oh, here, hard disk. Okay, so I have to go in and, so I do have, there's my SSD. Here's the NVMe, so that's the SSD drive, which doesn't really have a temperature issue. All right, so graph it. So you can have a little chart there. Anyway, you get the idea. And most of them can be configured where if you minimize them, they go down into the onto the toolbar at the bottom. You can set them to kind of show on the toolbar. But if you guys are interested, this is something I think is actually kind of nice to be able to monitor your system temperature, especially if you guys are playing a game. Some of the games actually have some in-game monitoring tools you can have for like a heads up display type thing. But typically, again, if you're playing a game, your toolbar in Windows isn't showing, right? I mean, it's full screen unless you have 2 monitors set up, and then you can monitor your system performance on one screen. But that's probably taking away from your gaming focus if you're trying to monitor your computer at the same time. So get rid of that.
Yeah, it can be a little tedious, but benchmarking like your hardware and validating it and then comparing it, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, mostly for me, it was just a matter of keeping an eye on the temperature on things. If anybody is overclocking their computers, I know some people do that. I have in the past. I don't currently have any of my current systems overclocked, but that's definitely something to take, to keep an eye on if you were doing you're overclocking the system, is to kind of look at your temperature. And then like SpeedFan has an option to create a graph, and then you can keep track of it over time. So you could go back and look at it after you played the game, I guess. I'll put this in the chat and I'll post it up on up on the discussion board as well. So you guys can look for it too. I just did a quick search for, what did I search for? CPU temp monitor. So yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. So Open Hardware Monitor is one, and there's just a lot of them to choose from. But if you find one that you guys like in particular, share it with the class or put it up on Discord or whatever. SpeedFan, it looks like it still was up on the top of the list, but the hardware monitor I've used in the past too. So that might be something to take a look at for your own computers, and just to kind of see where you're at as far as your temperature goes. And most of the time they are measuring in Celsius too. So 100 degrees Celsius was the max temperature for my CPU. Your CPUs might have a lower threshold. So that'd be something to look up as well. It's like how hot can your CPU get before you need to start worrying about it, kind of thing. So, all right, we're about done for today. Again, appreciate you guys showing up, and you guys that have cameras on, that's great. It makes me feel like I'm talking to real people half the time. And we will meet back here tomorrow. Be working on your quiz. There'll be another one coming up fairly quickly. So my words of advice are don't procrastinate. If you're using, get on Discord. If you want to discuss the questions, I'm okay with that too. So you guys can talk to each other and say, hey, what did you get for this one? Or I think it, if you want to actually have some discussion on it, that's totally cool. So, all right, we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Nice.
Good afternoon. Looks like a nice day out there. Got the windows open.